the reparations and some of the consequences of having, an adverse environmental reaction on the property. You get that phase 1 or phase 2 back, and it says, yeah, it's riddled with contaminants. Hey guys, welcome back to How to Invest in Commercial Real Estate. This is episode 12, where we're going to dive deep into underwriting. My name is Braden Cheek with the Criterion Fund, and I'm joined by my co-host, Brian and Joel. What's up?
What's going on?
Welcome back.
So, we've gone over, how we're finding our property, how we're going to make the offer on it. We got our free letter of intent from howtoinvest@CRE.com. We downloaded it. We know how to use it. We watched the last video, and now we're in contract on that property, and we need to figure out what's next. So, we probably read some package or OM that said, all the details, and now we need to go into underwriting or due diligence or wherever you're going to call it.
Start digging in.
Yeah, and the biggest pitfalls, right? There's a lot of traps you can fall into in due diligence, and we've fallen in quite a bit. So we'll go over, where the traps are and where you can save some money.
Yeah, so we're not going to go into an exhaustive list of everything you need to do during due diligence, because that's kind of boring, and that'll be in our course later on. But today we thought we'd go over some things, some areas that have cost us money, so it can save you guys money.
Absolutely. The two biggest areas of underwriting or due diligence, the two biggest things are the physical condition of the property, which may not be as relevant to the cash flow, but if it's deteriorating, you may have to pay to fix it. And then the second and most important one is the financial underwriting of the property. So when we refer to financial underwriting, that's more of how much money is the property making? What's the top line revenue? What are the expenses? How are we verifying that? How much money is it making at the end of the day? And then that's really financial modeling, right? Because we're most likely buying this piece of commercial property because it makes us money, right?
Yeah, we're buying a stream of income. We're paying a certain amount of money for hopefully a stream of income that we can count on.
We're financial buyers, basically.
Exactly. And the real estate's like the side kicker. You know what I mean? Same thing with the physical condition of it, right? Like a new roof isn't going to make you make more money. It's not going to substantiate the income on that property. But if you don't have it and you need to replace it, the financial costs of replacing the roof would affect it. So just kind of getting into the biggest one, not the biggest one as far as financial versus physical, but when you're looking at the physical condition of a property, what are things you're looking for? The physical condition of the property, underwriting.
Well, and we talk about pitfalls. We want to talk about the things that aren't so obvious. And in the maintenance world, there's going to be certain maintenance problems that could be hidden that you may not see just at first glance. And those are the important ones to figure out.
Right. So this is deeper than what if you're pulling up in the parking lot and just taking a glance, it's probably what you don't see is what we're trying to say.
Yes.
One of the biggest ones is a roof. Roofs are really expensive. There can be a lot of problems to a roof. It could be the shingles. It could be the wood rotting underneath that. And that, that's a big one to find. So a really common one is to make sure whoever is inspecting your roof is doing a roof boring test. Right? Because that's important. They're going to dig a hole in that roof, and it's going to tell you how many layers of roofing are there. It's going to tell you if the last roof was a tear off. Like, did they tear off the complete roof and do it right and take it down to the metal or the plywood or whatever it was? Or did they just put a new roof over the last roof, right? Which you can't do forever and could cause problems.
Yeah, just like your home.
Yeah, and roofs are really expensive. So when you're going in the underwriting and you're saying, hey, we agreed to this purchase price on this property. It was a $5 million price, but hey, I looked at your roof. Your roof's 20 years old. You need to pay a portion of that. You need to be asking the seller for a portion of that roof cost, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That could be a big cost. Like I said, they can put shingles over shingles or an overlay on a flat roof. There could be water damage underneath and the decking. We've bought in properties that had really bad roofs, and we in the very beginning, we didn't hire the right professionals to make sure that we had a full understanding of the situation. So that's one of the first ones on the maintenance is the roof. Get a professional up there and get a full roof report.
Have you ever run into a problem where your roof inspector didn't know what he was doing? I mean, do you need to? Most people that advertise as roof inspectors are they going to be all right? Or have you ever run into that where maybe a roof inspector didn't do his job and you need to get someone?
Yeah, commercial roofer shouldn't have a problem.
Okay.
Maybe on a residential fly-by-night guy or girl, you might have an issue, but commercial roofers are gonna do a good job.
Okay.
I like to use somebody who's not selling me a roof too. You know, the guy who's inspecting my roof is not the guy I would buy a roof from. So he's not just trying to like sell me the moon of like, hey, this roof is garbage and needs to be replaced. Well, I appreciate that if it's I appreciate that, but I just don't want a fancy sales pitch.
Okay.
All right, let me talk about a couple more the maintenance problems, and we'll go on to the next one.
Okay.
One that we ran into that I knew very little about when I first started investing is slab leaks. A lot of properties, especially older ones, they'll have a boiler or even a boiler chiller. The lines run underneath the parking lot, and if the property's old, they may be completely rusted out, falling apart, and you'll blow a slab leak under there, and your water bill you'll just know because your water bill will be thousands of dollars too much, and you'll lose the pressure. And so that's a huge one is to get somebody to inspect that and understand what your risks are there. They're really expensive to fix, hard to find, and really inconvenient for the tenants.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a big one is, in that market, let's just say if it's the city of Dallas, right? The city of Dallas, you should be able to pull a report or gather some data that says, hey, for apartment complexes in the city of Dallas, the city of Dallas bills this much for water. On average, the utilities for this apartment should be this per month. And if it's not, there's something wrong. It may be a slab leak and there's water just being dumped into the ground that nobody's found. It may be, inefficiencies in toilets and something like that. But utilities, generally speaking, in multifamily are massive cost savers. You can make a ton of money by saving utilities.
Mm-hmm. A couple more I have that we ran into when we bought was we bought something with aluminum wiring. And lenders might have a problem with that. Your insurance carrier might charge more or have a problem with that. It creates a fire hazard. It can burn the insulation. The plate covers can get hot. There is a cheap way to deal with that by pigtailing the ends of the wire, but that's something you can easily find out about. Let's see.
Working components are another big one. HVAC equipment, you can get burned on that really, really easy. Boiler chiller systems, especially just because, a traditional HVAC unit for your home is one, you'll have 1 to 4 units on your house, right? Well, an apartment complex has a boiler chiller, or like a hospital has one massive, massive unit in charge of heating and cooling that entire hospital or that entire apartment complex, right?
Yeah, so it's an expensive item.
Yeah.
Expensive piece of equipment.
And there's only one. So when one unit breaks down,
they all break down.
Right? If that unit is serving every apartment in that apartment complex and it goes down because it's 40 years old, those units can cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on how big, how old, what the system is, what the condition of the piping looks like. So, you need to be paying attention to HVAC.
Yeah, tenants aren't happy. Well, and multifamily families aren't happy if it's 105 degrees out and they don't have air conditioning, or the other way around, right? And they'll complain.
Beginning investors, I would say, be careful buying a common boiler chiller, because once again, if it goes out, it's a 200-unit deal. You have 200 tenants all without hot water. That's going to be a big problem for someone that's just getting in the game.
Yeah.
Let's see. Another thing I want to tell people is walk the property during a rainstorm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because everything looks great in the sun, but we've bought in properties thinking it hadn't rained the whole time we were in due diligence. It didn't rain for 20 days, 30 days. And now we're non-refundable, or we own the asset and a downpour comes in, and now you see all the drainage problems. Where it's flooding, there's runoff, the water's collecting in a foot deep area on the side of the building. So that's one I would suggest.
Yeah, and that's not cheap necessarily to fix either. It's not as easy as just changing the slope, because sometimes you can't drain onto somebody else's property, and that can be expensive. Yeah.
Water can be a big one. Walking in the rain is big, just because you can look up, see if anything's leaking. If it's retail property, you can go in and say, hey, do you have any leaks right now? It's raining. Walking in the rain or walking in different physical condition will definitely help.
Yeah. So that's good. What's next?
All right, here we got excessive structural damage. Structural damage can be a really big one, right? Because it's not something you can typically see unless you're trained. You may know what to look for, but cracking brick, or the structure leaning or falling off, or detaching itself from other parts of the structure could be a big one.
Excessive settling.
Yeah. So we're dealing with that right now on a deal we have here in Tulsa, where they have these brick facades on the sides of the building that kind of help with the siding and the look of it. And those started to pull away from the building and became a hazard. And so now we're having to pay to replace those. And now we got that in a short sale kind of foreclosure situation. So it was a good deal, but I don't believe we did a structure on it. So it always helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's one that's hidden that you can never tell, and it can be really expensive, and that's environmental contamination, right?
Oh yeah.
And so how do you check for that?
Yeah, you have to hire a professional. You have to hire people that do an environmental report. And
what's that report called?
Phase 1 is a typical term. It's called a phase 1, and basically companies go in and they look to see if there's any or ever was any potential for contamination. So they're going to look in the background of the property and see, okay, has any tenants ever used chemicals? Was this ever a landfill site, a gas station with underground tanks, dry cleaners that may have dumped chemicals, out in the drain? So those, and so they'll do that, and they'll say, hey, the phase 1 says it's clean, there's never been any risk. Or it says, yeah, there were some companies here 10 years ago or 20 years ago that may have had chemicals on site. Then they send you to do a phase 2. And so it's a more extensive test to confirm that there's no contamination.
So what are they testing? Phase 1, what are they testing? The ground, or the water, the air?
Yeah, they'll test. Well, I'm not an expert at this, but I do know they'll test. I think the phase 1 is like a no impact testing. So that is really just to confirm whether there could be presence of contaminants.
Yeah.
And so if you get a clean phase 1, there's no history of any chemical or any type of business like that, then you're clear. So it's a basic test. It may be a couple $1,000s.
Yeah.
Not a big deal. It's when they find that there used to be a gas station here 20 years ago, and that was raised, and then they built this apartment complex on it, or this retail center. Now they'll have a phase 2, and phase 2 is they actually do soil testing, water testing, and even air testing.
Gotcha. That seems like it could be expensive. I mean, I know you hear these horror stories on the news of, Flint, Michigan, and contaminated water. I mean, the reparations and some of the consequences of having, an adverse environmental reaction on the property. That you get that phase 1 or phase 2 back, and it says, yeah, it's riddled with contaminants. That can be mandated by the government, to where you have to report it to them because it's, the environment, and then they could mandate a lot of heavy cleanup and repairs, can't they?
Yeah, you don't want the EPA anywhere near this. And so I would say for beginners that if you get anything but a clean phase 1, without a lot of legal advice, I would move on to the next deal. We have a deal in Las Vegas that had a dry cleaner that was using a banned chemical, and we found out about it through the phase 1 and the phase 2 before closing. We went ahead and closed, because everyone told us, it's not a big deal. But we did make the seller put up several $100,000 in escrow until the problem was fixed. Okay. Well, once we closed, now
just as a sort of collateral or something.
Yeah. Not only did they commit to cleaning it, but they put up $300,000 to $500,000 just in case. It cost a lot. Well, here we are 2 years later. They ended up finding contamination all the way down at the water table, like 75 feet deep. They have to install these well monitors, and it's become a fiasco. Luckily, the seller is still paying, and it hasn't impacted us, but it can get really ugly and really expensive. Yeah. So,
well, I think one of the next ones, which is always one of my favorites, is just walking the property, right? You've got to be physically walking and looking at the majority, if not all, of the square footage of the property. It's absolutely crucial because you're going to see stuff. You're going to talk to, if it's retail, you're going to talk to the tenants. If it's multifamily, you're going to talk to the tenants no matter what.
And in multifamily, are you going to walk and look at every single
one?
Every single?
At least 75, 80%, at least. And you walk in, people have lied about down units. Hey, there's no down units. There's 500 rentable units, and every single one's rented. And then you walk in a dozen that are on fire. Hey, what happened to these 12 units? Are they rentable? You said there wasn't any down units.
Yeah.
How many times does that happen?
Well, it has happened, and let's just say they're trying to hide a down unit, and you say that you're only going to walk the vacants, but then they just list a vacant as occupied,
Yep.
and then that person moves out after your due diligence or right before you close. So there's a lot of tricks, especially in multifamily. It's important to walk all the units so you don't get surprised.
Okay. Yeah, and in retail and industrial, you want to see how those tenants are operating in their business. You want to see if there's leaky ceiling tiles. You want to see what the traffic feels like inside the space. Is it clean? Is everyone packing up to leave? As soon as you enter every single apartment that you're walking, they tell you about all of the maintenance problems. The HVAC doesn't work. That happens all the time, right? Yeah. Because they find out somebody was walking their apartment. It probably has to do with management. They're going to tell you everything. They're going to tell you stuff that's going to make the selling broker cringe because they want it fixed. It's where they live. They're going to be like, yeah, this drips all the time. Every time it rained. This place is a dump. Don't buy it. That happens all the time. You walk properties. Yeah. All the time.
Yeah, and we'll get into it later, but a good property management company, a good property condition report company will make sure they go into every unit. They'll test every light socket, every appliance, and all of that, and they'll give you a full report, which will be helpful. So
absolutely. All right, real estate taxes can really bite you in the tail.
Yeah, and we won't take a ton of time on this because it's pretty simple. Is that if someone's owned a property for a long time, the taxes may not have adjusted because there's a certain amount that they can adjust per year. And so you're going to pay this new price. And if let's say it's double, this guy bought it 10, 15 years ago for $3 million, and now the going price is $6 million. Mm-hmm. The taxes are going to adjust. So on like a multifamily, that burden is going to be yours. And so that can be a huge hit to the NOI if the taxes are going to double and you're on the hook for it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so taxes are paid based on the market value of the property. And the market value of the property is whatever you bought the property at. So it's public record. You bought the property for $5 million, right? So like you own this apartment complex for $2 million. I bought it from you for $5 million. My taxes are going to be more than double than yours, more than double. And you need to be putting that in the P&L.
And so the pitfall you're talking about there is someone might look at the taxes and say, okay, well, I'm going to budget that as my tax bill.
It's super easy.
Yeah, they're going to give you their NOI or their pro forma income. And so a beginner just may not understand how much those taxes are going to impact his cash flow.
Yeah. In multifamily, that's called a real estate tax adjusted NOI, which is super common. A good multifamily selling broker is going to put in there the NOI with the new adjusted sales tax already built in, right? They should do that. And then on retail, if you just have to evaluate how much of that real estate tax increase are the tenants going to absorb if they're paying triple net charges. So a lot of times that could be on more assets than retail. That could be, office in some cases, industrial in a lot of cases.
And so it's not a huge deal if all that increase can be passed on to the tenants. Although if it's a large increase, it is going to burden your tenants, and it may prevent you from increasing rent as fast as you want to increase it.
Right. Yeah, that's a big one. All right, so when you're looking at properties and you come across, let's use an example of maybe a smaller deal or maybe a Starbucks. Starbucks is a really good example. Let's use that one. So Starbucks is known for having very high rent. Mm-hmm. Right. Why do they have high rent, Joel?
Well, I think because they probably get the developer to build out the space to their specification, and so in order to do that, they want a high rent in return.
Boom. But it's not really rent, is it? It's like quasi like tenant improvement build out dollars. It's not really just rent.
I mean, as long as Starbucks is on the hook to pay it, it's guaranteed. They are a quality credit company. The problem you have to be careful of is when these tenants have artificially inflated rent for the submarket, and if you lose that tenant, that's a problem. Now, Starbucks, okay, you're going to get them to pay, but let's say, and we've run into this, you buy a property, and I'll give an example. We have a property that's got a dance studio, and they got a bunch of TI money when they built out their space, and so their rent is higher than market. So I had to make sure that we underwrote that risk, because for that space, if I didn't have that dance studio there and I was just going to rent it to a new tenant, I either have to give them TI or I'm going to have to get slightly lower rent.
Buying a property with a Starbucks, so it's single tenant. And so if they have a 10 or 15 year lease and you buy it and all of a sudden the lease is up and they decide to move, then you're trying to re-tenant that, and all of a sudden you've bought it based on an artificially high lease. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you may rent it for $25 versus $40 a foot per year.
Right.
Yeah, and another really common thing is gas stations. Like how many times have you seen a gas station or a Starbucks pick up and move across the street? And you're like, well, that really doesn't make sense, does it? I mean, they have determined this location is a good location. They obviously sell a lot of coffee here, but somebody offered them cheaper rent for a same build out, and they were like, man, I can keep the same location, cheaper rent, let's do it.
And so I just want to make sure people understand what we're talking about here. So let's say I'm going to rent a unit, and the tenant says I'll pay $14 a foot.
Gotcha.
And then he says, well, I'd like all this money to build out my store. And I say, great, I'll give you, that money, but I want $18 a foot in rent. Now if I go to sell before that lease is up, let's say the next year, well, now I gave them the difference between 14 and 18 for a year or two. But whoever's underwriting that deal, if it's on an 8 cap, they're going to pay 12 times that difference in rent.
Yeah.
So you see how some sellers might want or think about pumping those numbers up by giving TI and then try to sell and get that 12 multiple on that rent increase when he only had to give one or two times that increase.
Yeah,
so that's the TI part. And then the market part is just understanding a pitfall is, oh, this is a good cap rate. I've run into this where I think, oh, that's a nice property and that cap rate's high. But then when I look at the rents, they're way high. Yeah. And so that's why they're offering at a better cap rate. And I better be careful that those tenants stay or how am I going to re-tenant that at that high dollar?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect segue into the next one is looking at what types of income you have, right? Because there's going to be good income, which is, let's just say the market is $14 a foot for that same space. We'll use that same example. And they're paying $14 a square foot. That's great income. It's contractually obligated. It's in a lease. They're paying a market rent. Bad income that you want to make sure you're looking at is the tenant improvement dollars they got in the beginning of that lease that's making them pay 17 or 18 instead of 14. That's bad income because that's going to disappear one day. That dance studio that you mentioned, they could say, well, I thought I had this high rent because of, you built out the space. Well,
yeah, they've already paid that back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So do I get a rent decrease now?
Yeah, right.
So you've got to look out for things that may be extraordinary. It's not a normal reoccurrence.
Yeah. You want to, when you're underwriting income, you want to make sure that the income that you're underwriting and paying a multiple on, that's because that's what we talked about on the cap rate is paying a multiple on a stream of income is that you're not paying on rent that may or may not be there every month. That's not contractually there. And so I'll give you an example like late fees. Let's say someone is a bad operator. They don't, no one pays on time. They can't collect the rent, but they like getting those late fees. And then you go to buy it and they've built those late fees into the NOI. So now you're going to pay 12 times the value of those late fees. And then you take it over, and now you're getting the tenants to pay on time. Now that income isn't there, but you pay 12 times that income in the purchase price at an 8 cap. But then if you operate the property differently, or if the tenant changes their behavior, now that income isn't there. And so that's a pitfall when you're looking at underwriting a deal. Is what income is contractually obligated to be paid by the tenant, and what is fluff that is a one-time charge for a special circumstance that you should not pay a multiple on.
Good information.
Yeah, if people miss that, they're just getting punished for ignorance, man. Like it's all it is. You should just be able to listen to this podcast, watch the show, and be like, man, I need to watch out for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's all mistakes we've made. Yeah. I would love it if people wouldn't go through the decade of mistakes and costly errors that we went through.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they're learning from this podcast and they won't make those mistakes.
Yeah, and underwriting is great too because you just go to the seller. Hey, Mr. Seller, I've got a problem. I'm researching your great property, and you do have a great property. I'm excited to buy it. But man, I was looking into some of these things you told me, and it looks like your income is 5-10% artificially higher because of all your late fees. Now, I'm not going to run those late fees. I make my tenants pay on time, Mr. Seller. Now, how can I in good conscience pay 12 times a dollar you earn when I'm not going to earn that same dollar because I just run the property better?
One more example of that. That's a great point is, let's say someone, and we've done this from time to time, depending on the property, is one seller has got security deposits on all of their tenants. So that then when they go to do a make ready, when the tenant moves out, they have some money to help pay for any damage that the tenant did.
Yeah.
Let's say you have another operator that takes that security deposit and doesn't call it a security deposit. He calls it a one-time non-refundable, lease app deposit or lease fee.
So fees probably going on the P&L, deposits probably going on the balance sheet.
Yes, and so if he's taking that $200 security deposit but not calling it a deposit because it's non-refundable and he's putting it in the income column, now you're paying $12 or 12 times. I'm just using that as an example on an 8 cap. If it's a 7 cap, it's even higher.
Right.
You're paying that, and you shouldn't be, because that's money that should be there to both incentivize the tenant not to tear up your space and to help you put it back together when they move out. So that's a costly one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at the other side of that coin, right, like you could almost celebrate the seller. Like, man, I sold this in, I built this in, there's all this income, and, I don't know if they can earn that income, but I earned it while I was there, so I should put it on there. So you could kind of celebrate it as a seller, but at the same time, you want to be listing your stuff in a way to where people can build faith in it and it becomes reliable. You know what I mean? You don't want to be the guy who pitches and sells all your deals, and then come to find out everyone else like, oh, you better be careful about one of his deals. He's going to sell you a crappy old used car, man, because that stuff will come back to bite you. The world's small enough. People find out. The brokers will know.
Yep.
And I'm going to say we have done some of those things, never being dishonest. It's just on, let's say, an older property or a C-class property, that's how we chose to operate it.
And you're just going to operate it different. Absolutely.
We're just telling you as the buyer, the buyer needs to understand how to evaluate that income. And so that's why we're telling you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you touched on the next one briefly with, as it relates to income, but it's an equally important point as it relates to expenses, right? There's things that go on the P&L, and these are expenses. As much as we want to write off everything to help offset that tax we owe Uncle Sam, our accountants and CPAs make us put things on the balance sheet, things that you have to depreciate, like carpet, appliances, roofs and parking lots and HVAC equipment. If it's got a usable life of more than a year, you're really supposed to put it on the balance sheet and depreciate it. Well, you may not get a copy of that. A seller may not be so eager to disclose the cash flow statement month over month because it has more to do with their debt and liabilities that aren't necessarily related to the property. So if you're just looking at a P&L, and a multifamily would be a good one, the cost of those make readies, the seller could be capitalizing all of the cost. So when you're looking at the P&L, it's like, oh, somebody moves out and it costs virtually nothing to get somebody new in there. Well, yeah, on the P&L. But if you look at the balance sheet, there was new carpet that was capitalized. There was new appliances that were capitalized. There was all of these repairs. And if you're not finding that, when the P&L is one thing, but cash flow is very different.
Yeah. Well, and it is subjective. So it's not that a seller or buyer are doing anything wrong. There's just as an objective. It's a very subjective opinion of what is a capital cost that goes on the balance sheet and off of the P&L, which it would increase the NOI and make you pay more for the asset.
Correct.
And what should be considered an expense, a month-to-month expense, and should go on the P&L, reducing that NOI and making the property cheaper. And so what the pitfall is not really understanding that game, not understanding what the expenses. We're talking mainly multifamily here, but you're not familiar with the expenses that should go along with a 70s style vintage deal in your market. And so they're maybe putting too much on the balance sheet and capitalizing. And so when you get in there, you're like, man, my maintenance costs are double, or my maintenance costs are increased by 50%. Yeah. And it's because you're having to spend a lot of money that they were calling capital expenses.
Right.
And so you've got to understand that difference, and you got to make sure that you either know in general what those costs should be, or ask the seller, hey, tell me all of the capital dollars you've spent at this property over the last 2 years.
Okay.
I love it.
All right.
So hopefully, pitfalls, guys. All of these things have cost me money, and they've all been things that I didn't know how to mitigate. And so now, knowing about them, you guys can hopefully avoid them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you haven't downloaded your free letter of intent, make sure to go to invest.howtoinvestinCRE.com. We're giving away our letter of intent, and we even teach you how to use it. There's a video there, so you can go through that. I think we're going to help a ton of people today with underwriting. There's so much you can go into, and like Joel said, we're going to do a deep dive on underwriting in our course. But for now, here's the biggest pitfalls to avoid. It's going to save you a ton of money. Watch this. Send it to somebody.
Send us questions.
Absolutely. If you are looking for a property condition report person, I mean, they're everywhere. There's one in your market. In every market, there's somebody who can inspect all of these things physically and financially. If you can't find one, reach out to us. I'll help you find one. And that's it. We'll be back in a few days for another episode.
Thanks.